Communications Radio Network proudly presents The Alex Jones Show, because there's a war on for your mind.
There certainly is, my friends, and that's why I'm here live, Monday through Friday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. I come back in on Sunday night from 4 to 6 p.m. Central, because so much happens over the weekend. That's 22 hours live a week, ladies and gentlemen, of radio transmission. And we do it because we're aware of the globalist threat, what the New World Order is up to. We know if we warn the people, they can take action against it and defeat it. Now, I rescheduled her a few times because so much has happened in the last few weeks. I apologize, but I've read over her material, a lot of great research, because I've done so much research on so many subjects. I can tell when somebody's accurate info and is really addressing what's happening, and she's got so much more knowledge than I do, on this subject. I can just vet and tell you that what she's saying is accurate. Karen Russo of the Wrongful Death and Injury Institute. And you can go to her website, wrongfuldeathinstitute.com. We'll put a link to that up on screen as it is right now on prisonplanet.tv. Just boil it down for us, how you got into this, your research. You cover a lot of different areas, but I've heard you on the radio talking about, on the Genesis Network, specifically prisons. And people could say, oh, well, they're feeding them, half their diet or more of soy. What's wrong with that? Well, they admit it's full of estrogen-mimicking hormone. The men grow breasts. They have serious health problems. They gain weight. They're feeding us to close to half the diet in public schools is now soy-based. Same thing there. So that's just one small issue you cover, though, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, tell us about yourself, what you do, and then break down what's really happening right now in America.
Well, Alex, I'll give you the Cliff Note version as far as I can do it, and I'm not real good at doing this, but we'll give it a whirl. We consult with families of inmates specifically, but not just necessarily in the prison system, regarding medical and death issues. Medical issues, as you well know, can cover the gamut, and that goes anywhere from dietary needs to the cost of prison health care within the State Departments of Correction, and death issues insofar as it affects the medical examiner system nationwide and the egregious practices of the funeral home industry. So whatever happens in a prison system, when it comes to dealing with medical issues, we zero in on, basically shine a light in a very dark corner to help families either advocate for the inmate that they're trying to fight for the life of, or find out answers for those inmates that have died and the families have been disallowed the information.
Well, we know there's medical experimentation. Take Huntsville, Texas, has even leaked out in the Houston Chronicle, where the jail guards started getting sick and dying, and their families, and they were sewing dioxin into the prisoners' backs. They were saying you don't get any good food for a year unless you do this. They were doing medical experiments, not just Tuskegee with black folks. That's a good example because folks all seem to know about that. So that's going on. You've got their diet. You've got just all this hellish stuff. Break down some of the worst cases you've seen in your research and some of the things that are happening.
Well, I think the worst systemic issue that crossed our desk a couple of years ago was the blood scandal in the Arkansas Department of Corrections regarding Factor 8. And if anybody wants to really get well versed in that issue, just Google in the keywords Factor 8, and you'll get a wealth of information on that.
Yeah, Bayer Pharmaceutical, knowingly, Bill Clinton and others, all over the world, for a decade after they knew it, all had HIV and hepatitis, mixed it all together as Factor 8, sold to hemophiliacs and others worldwide, right. Hundreds of thousands.
Worldwide is the operative word. And Kelly Duda was the producer of that movie. He ended up eventually, a year or so ago, testifying in London, England, regarding that issue.
And by the way, the prosthesis doctor that exposed that in the first prison, he got firebombed the same night the Hemophiliac Society. I've interviewed him.
Unusual. He got unusual.
He got firebombed in Arkansas the same night, for those that don't know, that the Hemophiliac Society suing got robbed in Canada. Go ahead.
Yeah, and honestly, on the big radar screen of prison health care, these are just blips on the radar screen. The systemic problem that we've seen over the last 20 years is the issue of health care that the taxpayers in every state are paying for over and above what the costs are for the Department of Corrections. And these inmates are not being given, and the key words are the adequate community standard of health care already paid for by your tax dollars. So when they're cut loose, and there are 700,000 inmates that are released every year, The majority of this percentage of inmates either have not been diagnosed with a very severe disease, or they have been diagnosed and inadequately treated, and they're released out into the public, and everybody out here will say, well, you know, hell, we don't want to give inmates medical care. Why do the inmates get better health care than we do out here? And the actuality of it is, no, they don't. It's a misunderstanding of how the system is set up. It's a bad misunderstanding on the general public because they're ignorant as to the facts of how Department of Corrections works and how the money is managed and appropriated within the General Assembly.
Well, it's just like the VA, anything the government runs. You see all these huge expenditures, but only 30-40% actually goes to medical care. The rest is bureaucracy, corruption, medical test manipulation.
Yes, it is. But in this case, what we advocate so strongly for, you know, I can tell a family member, yes, I understand your pain and all this other stuff that you're going through, but the bottom line is the information is out here for you to get, and in order to hold them accountable. Now, the problem is, as you eloquently stated in past shows, the majority of John Q. public has no idea how to access a government website. And when they do access it, they don't know how to read it because the words are so convoluted and misleading, and they cannot connect the dots. So they don't understand how a General Assembly appropriations is going to affect their inmate and how it trickles down to their rank and file medical care out here. Because every time an inmate gets let loose and he's got HIV, HCV, TB, MRSA, meningitis, you name it, every time they're released out here, it is going to affect you. Next time you run through a fast food thing, understand who's washing the dishes.
Well, let's expand on that. Let's expand on that. You see it in medical journals, but you never see it in the news. Massive drug-resistant TB from the illegal aliens in the prisons infecting everybody.
Well,
Massive
it's not illegal aliens.
Well, I understand because it's spreading out to everybody. But 7,000 cases in 1 year alone, and there were no cases before that of wet leprosy.
Stop right there. Wait. And we've got to be really careful with these numbers. And this is the other issue when you're spouting off, and I don't mean that the way it came out, spouting off numbers about statistics within the prison system. The majority of the statistical tracking, when it is generated by a Department of Corrections or the Bureau of Justice, took this to task a couple of years ago, the numbers are off.
It's worse.
Because they are not reporting, for example, Prison Deaths Act. To give you an example, if I've got an inmate XYZ who, suicide is an issue, especially in your state, but I'll just take suicide as an example. Somebody is screaming in the cell block that inmate XYZ has hung himself, and they know that he is either in the process of or has already completed that task. And these inmates within the cell block may be screaming bloody murder at the top of their lungs for these correctional officers to get down there to see what's going on. Now, I give you a case in point. It took 2.5 hours for correctional staff to get down to a unit in the Clements, Estelle unit in your state.
Yes.
Guy is clearly dead, has been dead for hours. And what the standard operating procedure for a Department of Corrections staff is, you never pronounce that inmate dead on site, ever. And if you do, it's usually because a correctional officer is new at his job, or he's panicking, or he's nervous. It's one of those three. So what they'll do, if the cell block is already ADSEG, administrative segregation, or solitary, these guys are already locked down anyway. If it isn't, they're going to lock down the cell block, and they're going to call medical. Medical does not necessarily show up in rapid paced time, and they do that premeditatedly. The first thing the majority of them will do is go to an inmate's file to see if they've got a DNR on file. Do not resuscitate order. If medical staff sees that there is a DNR on file, they're going to take their sweet time getting to that cell block, because that DNR is their ticket to not having to treat him. even if he had a 50-50 chance of making it.
And that's why they're wanting the general public to sign these, because now you could be helped at the hospital, but the hospital wants $300,000 for your organs. They then don't give you treatment.
Yeah, but I don't want to get off point here. So if you've got an inmate that's got a DNR, they're not going to show up fast enough, but they'll show up. So the next thing, either the medical staff is going to call or the DOC staff is going to call an ambulance. Ambulance is going to show up, and these poor guys have no idea where they're going, and they get into the cell block.